You saw it in her eyes, not when she looked at you, but when she looked away, that flicker of recognition, like a dream she almost remembered, then rejected. She smiled like someone touching a locked door, whispering a name she swore she'd forgotten. You were kind. You waited. But something in her recoiled, as if your gentleness made the silence louder. She didn't run from danger. She ran from safety, from stillness, from the unbearable weight of being seen without being chased. You didn't fail her. You revealed her, and that was unforgivable. She wanted warmth, but not yours. She wanted understanding, but not the kind that listened. She wanted a man who would throw her against the edge of herself, not one who would hold her while she trembled. You were a mirror, and she wanted a mask. You offered devotion, and she longed for escape. Because love is not a refuge. It is the wound reopened, the ache reawakened, the quiet that exposes what the chaos used to hide. And you were too quiet. You thought your love would be enough. Not loud, not proud, just steady. A quiet warmth you carried like a secret, hoping one day she'd see it and feel safe. But she looked at you like a prayer she no longer believed in, not because you were wrong, but because you reminded her of everything she wasn't ready to confront. You did not chase, you did not conquer. You waited, and that was your sin. Because she was not running from you, she was running from what your presence demanded she face. You were not the storm, you were the stillness after, and stillness terrifies the soul that only knows itself through noise. She did not know how to breathe in peace. She had grown addicted to being unsettled. The man who left her guessing, doubting, reaching, he kept her alive in her drama. But you placed a mirror in front of her and whispered nothing, and in that silence, she saw the hollowness of the chaos she clung to. She saw a man who would not fight her because he did not need to, and that absence of need, it made her feel invisible. You were not unworthy, you were unbearable, because gentleness, real gentleness, is not weakness. It is a form of strength so quiet, it strips away every excuse. When you didn't try to impress her, dominate her, or fix her, she was left with only herself. And what she saw was not beautiful to her. It was raw, it was tired, it was unready. And you, standing there in your calm, made her feel exposed. So she smiled. But it was the smile of someone who knows she cannot stay. And you, the man who thought love meant patience, stood still as she drifted back to the fire that burned her. Because pain is predictable. Because suffering is familiar. Because your arms did not offer the thrill of rejection. They offered the abyss of reflection. And most people would rather be bruised than be seen. She needed to bleed to feel real. You offered healing, and healing felt like silence. It felt like a room without drama, a kiss without tension, a gaze without demand. And so, you became the void. Not because you were empty, but because you were full in a world that feeds on absence. You didn't lose her. You simply never had what she was willing to surrender. Because she wanted to fight, to conquer, to beg, to feel the high of despair. But you were the end of all games. You were the answer she wasn't ready to live. And so she chose noise over peace, war over truth. The man who would break her, because he at least made her feel. But you asked her to feel without the wound. You didn't say much, but your silence was a cathedral, and she was used to temples that burned down every winter. You lit no fires, you built no walls, you simply waited, and waiting is louder than screaming. When the person in front of you is screaming inside. You didn't compete, you didn't persuade, you didn't seduce, you just remained, and that's what made you dangerous. You didn't chase her, you revealed her, and in doing so, you awakened something she could not tolerate: the truth. The truth that maybe she didn't want love, she wanted drama disguised as passion. The truth that maybe she didn't want to be held, she wanted to be hunted. The truth that maybe she didn't want peace, she wanted validation through conflict. And you, the gentle man, were none of those things. You were not the father she had to prove herself to. You were not the ghost she hoped to resurrect. You were not the war she wanted to lose. You were just there. And that was the problem. Because being there means she has no one left to blame. Being there means she cannot perform. Being there means she cannot run, and she only knows how to run. So she turned away. Not because you weren't enough, but because you were too much, too present, too calm, too still, too real. You saw her, didn't you? Not the mask, not the laugh, not the flirtation. You saw the ache beneath her elegance. And that is the one thing she could not forgive you for. Because in your gaze, she became human, and she has spent a lifetime trying to be anything but that. She wanted to be adored, not understood. She wanted to be worshipped, not witnessed. She wanted to be pursued, not held. But you did not kneel. You did not reach. You did not chase. You stood there, heart open, without hunger. And in a world of starving men, your fullness made her feel small. She needed a struggle to feel alive. You gave her stillness. She needed a storm to feel worthy. You gave her shelter. She needed a villain to feel innocent. You gave her no one to blame. So she left, and you still wonder why. You trace the moments, the soft laughter, the subtle closeness, the quiet connection, and none of it makes sense. Because everything felt right. And it was. But right does not mean ready. Truth does not mean timing. And love, real love, is terrifying when your soul still clings to suffering. You were the door she did not know how to open, because behind it, there were no games left to play, no masks left to wear, no wounds left to bleed, just her, just you, just silence. And silence, when you've lived a life of noise, feels like death. But it wasn't death, it was resurrection. And she wasn't ready for that. So she chose the familiar cross, the one she's nailed herself to before. The chaos, the coldness, the man who says all the wrong things, but at least makes her feel like she's fighting for something. You were the absence of all that. You were the end of war, and she still needed the battlefield. You didn't lose her because you failed. You lost her because you didn't fight, and that revealed how much she needed to. She was not rejecting love. She was rejecting what love demands of us. Because love without manipulation is naked. Love without control is terrifying. Love without pursuit feels undeserved. And you loved her without wanting to own her. That is the highest form of love, and the hardest to receive, because it does not make you feel powerful, it makes you feel seen, and most people are not ready to be seen, especially by someone who does not flinch, especially by someone who does not need them to be anything else. You loved her without trying to fix her, and that was your crime. She needed to be rescued to feel worthy. You simply stood there, offering nothing but your presence. And presence is the one thing she never learned how to trust. So she ran, and you watched her go, and you still wonder why. You thought that by laying down your sword, you were honoring her, that by refusing to dominate, to command, to possess you, were choosing something higher. But she did not see nobility. She saw vacancy. You wanted to be safe for her, but safety to a restless soul looks like indifference. You offered surrender without weakness, yet she only understood power as possession. So your restraint became a question in her mind. Why doesn't he fight for me? And the answer she whispered to herself wasn't truth, it was fear, because I am not worth the battle. You believed love was sacrifice, but she was looking for a conquest. She did not want to be held. She wanted to be taken, not by force, but by hunger, by urgency, by a man who could not help but chase. Because in being pursued, she could forget the part of her that still felt hollow. But you did not chase. You bowed, you listened, you stayed. And she mistook that steadiness for absence, that control for apathy. Because how could someone so composed possibly need her? You did not burn, so she wondered if you truly had fire. You stood without trembling, so she doubted if you had depth. She needed to be chosen with chaos, and you chose her with silence. She did not know that silence could roar louder than lust. She did not know that you were choosing her every moment, just not through desperation, not through performance, not through war. You were choosing her with presence, not pursuit, and to a soul trained to equate love with effort, effort with strain, strain with worth, your calmness felt like abandonment. She had spent her whole life being tested, and now you placed no trial before her. She had survived men who pushed, who punished, who provoked, and now you stood like a monk in a marketplace, asking for nothing, needing nothing, demanding nothing. You disarmed her, and that is what broke her. Because if she could not prove herself to you, how would she earn you? If you saw her clearly from the start, what was left to unveil? If you were already there, truly there, where would her longing go? You were not her fantasy, you were the collapse of it, and fantasies die screaming. You see, the sword is not just a weapon, it is also a signal. It tells her you are willing to fight even if you must fight her. And this, twisted as it may seem, confirms her significance. But you refused the sword. You set it at her feet like a knight who had already won his own war. And she did not know how to love a man who had already conquered himself. She wanted your chaos, not your clarity. She wanted to tame you, not be seen by you. She wanted to feel her power by resisting you, but you did not push. And so she was left shadowboxing. And shadowboxing is not seductive. It is maddening. You stood with open hands, and open hands do not compel. They invite, and invitations require choice, not reaction. But she did not want choice. She wanted to be swept, to be overpowered, to be undone. And you would not do that to her. You would not take the sword, because the sword is for the man who does not know who he is. But you knew, and that was the wound, because a man who knows who he is cannot be manipulated, and she needed to feel in control even as she begged to lose it. You did not give her control. You did not give her collapse. You gave her something far more dangerous, freedom. You were not the cage. You were the open field. And she had never been taught how to run toward love, only how to escape it. You were not the test. You were the end of testing. And when there is no test, there is no proof. And when there is no proof, how can she be certain she is enough? You did not doubt her. You did not question her. You simply were. And your being clean, clear, unshaken made her ache with uncertainty, because she had only known intimacy as performance. And now, you stood before her, unentertained by the show. You loved her without being hypnotized. You saw her without being fooled. And she could not seduce a man who had already found what he needed within himself. That is the deepest insult to the false self. She wanted to be worshipped. You refused, not out of coldness but out of reverence. You saw her not as a goddess, but as a soul, and that is the most unbearable love of all, because it asks nothing, it demands nothing, it simply recognizes. And recognition, true recognition, strips away the veil she spent years weaving. You did not chase her into the fire, you waited at the edge of the forest, and she needed you to run, because the one who runs confirms the myth, and you refused the myth. You refused to become the villain in her private drama. You refused to enact the script she had memorized since girlhood. You refused to fall for her projections, And so she labeled you passive, cowardly, boring, uninvested. But it was not cowardice. It was clarity. It was the clarity of a man who knows that love cannot be forced, cannot be performed, cannot be proven. It can only be met. And she was not ready to meet it. She was ready to fight it, ready to flirt with it, ready to fantasize about it. But to stand before it bare, silent, soft. No, that is what you offered. And that is what she fled. Because love, real love, does not dazzle. It disarms. It does not conquer. It reveals. And revelation is a terrifying mirror for the soul that only knows itself through masks. You loved her like a man who no longer needs to be needed. And that is the most intimate threat of all. Because it means she cannot control you. She cannot define herself through you. She cannot collapse into you. She must stand beside you, whole, awake, uncloaked, and that she is not yet ready for. She wants the man who will break her, not the one who invites her to stop breaking herself. She wants the war, not the stillness after. And so you remain unmoving, unwounded, not because you feel nothing, but because you feel everything and still choose peace. You are the knight who refused the sword, and that is why she could not love you. You didn't hold up a mirror to punish her. You held it without judgment, without trembling, without flinching. But to the soul that hides behind reflection, a clear mirror is more violent than a blade. She looked into your eyes and saw herself not as she pretended to be, not as she wanted to be remembered, but as she truly was beneath the performance. And in that gaze, something inside her twisted, because your love was not worship, it was not hunger, it was not a wound in disguise, it was presence. And presence, when met without illusion, dissolves every costume. You did not try to mold her, you did not try to change her, you simply remained. And that constancy was unbearable, because it forced her to confront the truth she had never prepared herself to be seen by someone who didn't need her to be anyone else. You never asked her to perform, and that was the deepest threat, because she only knew connection through effort, through seduction, achievement, sacrifice. But you stood there, unmoved by the masks she wore. You saw the cracks, the trembling, the ache beneath her voice, and you loved her anyway. Not despite them, but through them. And that kind of gaze, that kind of love, is the one thing the false self cannot survive. She wanted to be the illusion. You wanted the one hiding behind it. So she tried again, a different version, a different tone, a different story. She waited for you to react, to validate, to play your role. But you did not. You did not flinch. You did not collapse. You did not try to fix what was never broken. You saw through, and in seeing through, you became the mirror she could not shatter, because she had shattered so many others. Men who bent, men who craved, men who reflected only what she wanted to see, men who begged, or boasted, or broke. But you held her gaze with quiet reverence, not adoration, not lust, reverence, the kind that does not cling, the kind that honors without control, the kind that says, I see you, even here, especially here. But being seen means she must finally face what she has spent her life escaping, not shame, not guilt, but the quiet truth that she has always been waiting for someone to meet her soul, and when it finally arrived, she turned away. Not because she didn't want it, but because she didn't believe she deserved it. You were not a mirror of her ideal. You were the mirror of her longing. And longing, when exposed without control, becomes unbearable. She needed to feel superior, or inferior, or desired, or adored anything but equal, anything but whole. because wholeness means there is nothing left to chase, and she was still addicted to the chase. You held her without touch, you spoke to her without words, and in that space between doing and being, her illusions began to unravel, not violently, slowly, like a dream fading at dawn. And that kind of unraveling soft, irreversible is more terrifying than collapse, because you did not destroy her, you awakened her, and that awakening felt like loss. Loss of performance, loss of power, loss of the roles she played to feel loved. And so she ran not from rejection, but from recognition. She left not because you failed to meet her, but because you met her too deeply, because in you, she could no longer hide. You became the death of her act, the death of her defenses, the death of her imagined self. And she wasn't ready to die. Not yet. You didn't try to fix her pain. You didn't try to solve her contradictions. You simply let them be. You stayed near them, sat beside them. And she realized, maybe for the first time, that she had spent her whole life using her wounds to attract love, and now here was someone who did not need her to be broken. That was the final mirror. Because if love does not come from suffering, then who is she without it? If love does not require performance, then what has all the performing been for If someone sees her without judgment, then what does she do with all the masks you left her no enemy to fight, no ideal to impress, no battlefield on which to bleed? You gave her only one thing, her own reflection, and that was the one thing she could not embrace. She called you boring, too soft, not masculine enough. But what she meant was, you do not validate my illusions. She said you were passive, indecisive, emotionally distant. But what she meant was, you do not play the game I know how to win. She accused you of being unavailable. But what she meant was, you are so present. I can't hide from myself. And so she chose another mirror, one she could shatter, one who would love her through conflict, through chaos, through crisis, because at least then she would feel real. At least then she could perform and be rewarded. At least then she could remain in motion. Stillness was the one place she could not survive. But you did not follow, you did not call, you did not beg. You understood, because what she was running from was not you, it was herself. And only she can turn back and look into that mirror again. Only she can choose to meet herself where you already waited. You were never her test. You were her truth. You were not the fantasy. You were the end of it. And fantasies, when broken too soon, leave behind a wound deeper than heartbreak, the wound of having glimpsed what is real and choosing the dream instead. So now you walk on, not bitter, not proud, just awake. You do not close the mirror, you leave it standing. Perhaps one day she will return, not for you, not for love, but for herself. Because somewhere, beyond the noise, beyond the wounds, beyond the roles she remembers the silence. She remembers the man who did not tremble. She remembers the mirror she once ran from. And when the ache is quiet enough, she may return, not to be adored, not to be rescued, but to finally be seen by herself, as you once saw her, as you still do, without hope, without need, without demand. Only presence, only truth, only the mirror, unshattered, somewhere. The mirror still stands, untouched, undistorted, waiting, not for her return, not for reconciliation, but as a silent witness to what was once glimpsed and fled from. You no longer reach for her name. You no longer rehearse the what if. That name belongs to a time before the fall, not a fall into despair, but a fall out of the dream. And in that dream, you were the still figure in the corner of the stage, the one who refused his script, The one who stepped back when all others chased. The one who, in his silence, became unbearable. Now, she walks past reflections that never hold, smiles at lovers who never see, runs through fires that burn the same story into her hands, again and again, but sometimes just before sleep. When the noise recedes and the stage curtains fall, she remembers, not your voice, not your touch, but the mirror, and what it showed her just once before she turned away.